Good afternoon, morning, evening, whenever this is. Hope everybody is well. Hope everybody is doing wherever you are, however you are hanging out. I'm here in front of my brick wall as usual. All you hanging out here with me and in StreamYard with John Korean Un, can't speak. Donald Lynn, Renee, Born Free Films, Charlie, Rondell, Lewis, Dustin, Miggs, etc. Everybody else. Hope everybody is well. For whatever reason, I'm having a problem with YouTube, so I'm doing it on X, and then I post it as a on YouTube. So it'll be on YouTube. It'll just be after we do this. I'm doing it today because I wanted to bring you up to speed as to what's going on and talk to you about the upcoming deposition. And I saw a bunch of discussion because John Forster posted something last week. I was out of town, but he posted something. I wanted to comment about that, comment about the receiver, etc. Before I get started with that, again, hope everybody is well. Happy holidays, happy Thanksgiving. We're in December now, so let's see how it rolls. Deposition of Rahbari is set for Wednesday of this week, and I will report on that. Of course, I will attend, and I also report, and we will go from there. Before I start, of course, this is not legal advice. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, do backflips, and whatever else makes you happy. Before we get started, a manager brings a dog into a bar. The manager brings his dog into a bar, and the dog starts playing the piano magnificently. Amazing. A few minutes pass, and another, but this time a female dog, comes in and drags out the other dog outside the bar. The bartender turns to the manager who brought the dog in and said, "What's up?" The bartender is told by the manager that was his mother, and his mother wanted him to be a doctor. 5 blondes go into a bar and order 5 shots 3 times in a row. And after each time for the toast, they say amongst themselves together 51 days. After the 3rd round of shots, the bartender turns to one of the blondes and asks, "What's up with this this toast?" The one blonde turns to the bartender and says, "We did a jigsaw puzzle together, and it said 2 to 4 years, but we finished in 51 days." A plane is flying in the air, of course. That's where planes fly. I don't know if you guys knew this, but planes actually fly in the air. And unfortunately, there's a huge turbulence. So the plane is shaking about, and the passengers are always getting frightened. That happens when there's turbulence, even though that's just bumps. Like, you don't get scared on the road, but in the air we do. I guess because the consequences are different. Anyway, the plane is shaking around. This old woman notices there's a minister in front of him. So she turns to the minister and says, "Can you do anything about this?" The minister says, "I'm in sales, not in management." And last but not least, and this usually applies to the current, a lawyer is standing in line at a movie theater. All of a sudden, he feels the guy behind him kicking him and kneading him and massaging him his back. He turns around and asks the guy, "What's up with this?" The guy tells the lawyer, "I'm a chiropractor and I'm practicing." The lawyer responds to the chiropractor and says, "You don't see me screwing the guy in front of me." All right. So we got that out of the way. And again, to everybody hanging out here today, thank you for being here, and thanks for sticking together. So kind of want to talk about a few things today. One, the receiver, but I'm going to start off with AIVRSITY. So AIVRSITY, we see a deal, and obviously I've had some communication with John Forster, but I haven't been involved in any of the negotiations. I haven't seen any of the legal documents. I'm not party to the discussions. I just have had friendly discussions with John in general. And I don't remember the last time, but certainly within the past couple of weeks, I spoke with him also. So, and I've talked to him about this, and he's talked to me about kind of what's going on in general. And he's complained kind of all the stuff that he's complained about in public, he's complained about to me also. So it's no different. And, part of his complaint is the receiver hasn't responded to him or returned his call, or et cetera. Or hasn't responded to complete the transaction. And if you recall, when the receiver was appointed in September of 24, the indication was that the audit would be completed shortly. So we are over a year later, and there's no completed audit, nor any specific date. And I continue to ask for specific dates or indications, for example, whether it be done before the end of this year. And as of now, I still have not gotten any indication that it will be done, or it has been done, or when it's going to be done. And again, they may be refraining from disclosing that. This is all my opinion, of course, but they may be refraining from disclosing that again because concern about disclosures, SEC disclosures, et cetera. And they had mentioned before about not giving advantages in trading, et cetera, to those who are trading. So maybe that's a reason, whatever. But in my discussions and in what John has indicated, John Forster has indicated, he was expecting the audit to be done. And I think in part he believed and again, I'm not a party to this, so I don't know what the discussions were, but I think he had expectations that he would have gotten documents related to the audit at some point in time. And my understanding, he has partners or people he has to report to. And to this point in time, as far as I know, he's not gotten anything related to the audit, as far as I know. Not any paperwork, certainly not any completed paperwork. I don't know if he's gotten any drafts. As far as I know, he hasn't gotten any drafts, but I don't know because I haven't seen anything to that effect. So, a lot of time has passed, and he's got people he spoke to. So I'm kind of surprised in a way. And I've told him this, that he hasn't walked by this point in time, because a lot of time has gone by and there's been, not a lot of progress in completing the transaction with GTII. But he's hung out. Excuse me for a second. But he's hung out and continues to hang out. And I guess he's still here, and I think his intent is still try to do a transaction. And I know his intention because he's stated this multiple times. And I feel comfortable saying this, although again, this is just my opinion because I'm not him. But I think he's solely interested in the shareholders of GTII because, as framed, what he's getting from GTII is a pile of crap, right? Because, we know what it's in GTII. No revenue, no deals, no nothing. So it's just a shell, but you could buy a shell. But I've been impressed that Forster has hung out still, even though this transaction, I'm sure, in legal fees has cost him a significant amount of money, and will in the future, I'm sure, because he's indicated of certain intentions about what to do. And because of that, and because of my discussions, I think his only interest is the GTII shareholders, because what he would be acquiring from GTII, this shell, is basically has a negative value because, right, we're in litigation, et cetera. There's no revenue, no nothing. So I think his intentions are pure, that his interests are, and again, this is my opinion, but his interests are in the interests of the shareholders. Now, I don't think he's got partners to account to, et cetera. So I don't think he, wants to overpay, but I think he has given a valuation. And again, I'm not familiar with the numbers, but this is my general understanding that in the transaction that he's given a valuation of GTII that's substantially more than what its value is. And he's got to convince his partners to do this deal, or partners, shareholders, or whatever it is in his company. So I think his intention and his concern about the receiver was that the receiver was going to try to pull out as much money out of GTII as he could for his own purposes. And again, that's just opinion. But it's my opinion also to this point in time. Again, I've had more dealings with Dylan, and our communications have improved. So my communications with counsel for the receiver have improved, and we're kind of working together in terms of, I'm not doing much relative to Dylan, but I'm trying to assist him, like in depositions, give him thoughts or whatever, and we have discussed that. So I think the attorneys are doing work, but the attorneys doing work is different than work being done in the interest of the shareholders. The attorneys are involved because they're representing the interests of the receiver, and the interests of the receiver are involved in they froze the shares, they're trying to cancel shares, etc. So all that work can be done in good faith, but that doesn't necessarily benefit shareholders. So my concern with the receiver is he's accumulating a bunch of shares. So that's good. If he's on the same team as us, that's good. However, I don't have any understanding that he couldn't, one, sell his shares now, although I think Dylan indicated he hadn't at some point in the past. But how about like when if and when the stock trades, he dumps a bunch of shares? What would the impact would be? And I've not gotten any indication in any sense that the receiver has any interest in GTI shareholders. I think he has an interest in completing his job. I think he has an interest in being compensated, but I don't think those equate at all with the interests of GTII. So when I, and this is just my personal opinion, when I compare based upon my discussions and evaluation of what Forster has said, and based upon my evaluation of what the receiver has said and is doing, if I were to pick one that has an interest in GTI shareholders, I think it's easy to see that Forster has a much greater interest in the shareholders than the receiver. The receiver has an interest, in my mind, getting paid, getting as many shares as possible, and being able to liquidate those shares, getting compensated beyond that. So the fact that Forster and AIVRSITY have hung out and are still interested, I think is a huge positive. And again, in my personal opinion, evaluating who has the interests of GTI at heart, obviously have to fall on the shoulders of Forster. Forster is in the negative. He's out money. The receiver has gotten money and has gotten shares. And remember, the issue about the receiver is a lot of those shares that are now available, when the deal was made to compensate the receiver, nobody knew what those 175 million shares existed. He would be the number one shareholder. It doesn't make sense that he should be the one who's beneficiary. And above all, in the state of Nevada, I'm not a Nevada attorney, but I think I read it in the statute, that reasonableness is still the overreaching governing principle. So compensation of a receiver has to be reasonable and as structured. And again, nobody knew, I guess maybe the receiver knew, but nobody otherwise knew the number of shares that might be available. And for him to get, like 18, 20 million shares is ridiculous, especially on a company that produces nothing. And also, with regard to that, he hasn't gotten the thing trading in the time period that was suggested when he was hired. He was hired again, September of 2024. When he was hired, the order specifically kind of gives the indication that the audits and any filings would be accomplished in the short term. Short term being like within a quarter, within 2 quarters, within 3 quarters, not a year plus later, and nothing's gone forward in that. Now, that's separate and apart from his freezing shares, acquiring shares, canceling shares, and all that litigation that's ongoing. But that's separate. And that only benefits, primarily it benefits him, because to the extent he brings in money, he gets compensated. His counsel gets compensated. That really doesn't benefit us. So my leanings are with AIVRSITY and Forster. Now, going beyond that, if in fact, let's say the receiver doesn't do the AIVRSITY deal, that would be my view because of the share issue and compensation. And my concern would be if he brought in anybody else I would have to know whether he had any prior relationship with that person, or whether that prior entity or person had any connection to the prior dealings with GTII. So to the extent that the receiver wouldn't do a deal with AIVRSITY and elected to do a deal with someone that he had a prior association with, or somebody who was associated with doing business with GTI in the past, that would make me very uncomfortable, because I would be concerned there was some kind of shenanigans going on between the two. And if in fact they didn't do the deal with AIVRSITY, I'd be wondering if it was based on the sole financial interest of the receiver and perhaps someone associated with the receiver. That's what I would think. I don't know. That's pure speculation on my part. But I can only look at how the compensation has flown to this point in time. And in the 5th receiver's report, the receiver like banged away at his compensation. So that reinforced my concerns, didn't alleviate my concerns. So as to like the intentions, the ultimate intentions of the receiver, I have no trust in the ultimate intentions of the receiver, but he can only be gauged by his actions at this point in time and his statements. So his statements in that 5th report really concern me, and he's not communicating on his GTII X site, and he's not communicating basically, period, as far as I'm concerned. He's kind of in hiding. I don't know where he's hiding, but he's kind of in hiding. He appears at the deposition, announces his presence, but doesn't comment beyond that. At least I've seen him in a box on Zoom, so that's what my understanding is. But anyway, so there was a lot of discussion about the deal with Forster and whether it's the same deal. Well, a year plus has passed, so is it the same deal? I have no idea, but I doubt it. And would it be appropriate for it to be the same deal, a year plus after the fact? Probably not. But the bottom line is, I feel comfortable, and I don't know how it'll play out, but I feel comfortable that Forster has the interest of GTII and valid GTII shareholders at heart. Otherwise, there'd be no reason for him to be here, really. Nobody goes to lose money, to waste money on legal fees, especially with an entity that's just a box, empty box. So it only makes sense that his interests are shareholders. And I'm sure he hopes that if he helps shareholders out, that then they will be like following his products and his entities. I'm sure that's a benefit that he would expect or anticipate. But why not? If he helps out shareholders, I would think shareholders would have an allegiance to him. And if the receiver helped out shareholders, I'm sure the shareholders would have an allegiance to him. But to this point in time, the receiver has given no indication in my mind that he has any interest in helping out shareholders. But there's a lot of people watching what's going on, and nothing's going to happen without there being an ability to communicate all this to the court. So that's kind of where I leave it. So when there was some discussion, some people were concerned about what the exchange rate would be in shares. At the current, we have 0. So whatever we get as shareholders, I think will be an improvement. And I think evaluating what are the possibilities, I think that we would ultimately do better with something associated with Forster than something associated with the receiver. And however that needs to be carried out, then that's the way it needs to be carried out. So that's kind of my view on Forster versus the receiver, and the numbers are the numbers. So, I wouldn't expect things to be the same. Whatever was discussed a year ago, and the receiver has changed also, obviously. Whatever was discussed a year ago is not the same. So that's kind of where that stands. So I expect more news from AIVRSITY in the future. I would expect, if Forster is going to continue. And I would expect more information from the receiver if the receiver really, wants to assist shareholders. And again, I think he's been in hiding, extremely conservative, not expressing any interest, whereas Forster's expressed interest in shareholders. Whether that's true or not, he's expressed it. The receiver has only expressed interest in his compensation. And I think that's really sad and makes me concerned. Doesn't make me concerned about what he's doing legally. It makes me concerned about his ultimate motives and the benefits to shareholders. So all you out there can have your own views. You can decide who you want to align your interest to, who makes you comfortable. But in my mind, I think it's an easy call. But people differ, and we can go from there. And I continue to watch what the receiver does and comment on that, etc. And I continue interacting with his counsel. So I'm trying to be fair. That's why I've been giving his counsel more credit, because I have more credit to give to the counsel. But that does not change my opinion of the receiver. So I'm going to leave that as is. The last part I wanted to talk about is the Rahbari deposition, and that is coming up on Wednesday afternoon. And of course, I will be in attendance along with everybody else, and it will be really interesting what he says. Now, again, this is as to the shares he received or could receive. And I think, if I recall, he got, like, when he signed an employment agreement, he got several million shares, I believe, and he could get upwards of like 25 million extra shares, something like that. So quite a interesting sum that he could have acquired. And if you recall, the scenario was he got brought in as consultant to kind of, I think it was to prepare some kind of succession plan, deal with issues, and deal with potential capital markets and that. I don't know what he did as to capital markets. If you recall, at some point in time, there was 36 million shares or so that were canceled, and there was an 8K that was issued, and that said those shares, based upon, I think it was something along these lines. And there was a PR that was issued, and it said something to the effect that per the advice of Rahbari, the shares were canceled, and that they were deemed either erroneously or inadvertently, they were issued either erroneously or inadvertently. I really think that's nonsense, by the way. Erroneously or inadvertently. I don't think that anything that the prior management did was inadvertent. It was all, in my mind, all intentional, all with specific intent, all done to benefit themselves. So I think that 8K was false, and that's a SEC filing. So is that a securities violation? I don't make those calls, but if you, in a public document on a public company, you put a falsehood in a filing to the SEC, I would think that's problematic in my mind. And then, if you recall, also, he was hired first as a consultant, and then apparently an employment agreement was made, and then they announced that he had been made COO, Chief Operating Officer, but they announced it, and again, I'm making up dates, but it'd be like if they said on July 1 that effective April 1, Rahbari was COO. Now, those aren't the exact dates, but my recollection, it was some kind of setup like that. I don't know who made those decisions, by the way. That could be Reichman, that could be all management. I don't know who it is, but that seemed like they were going back in time, and probably going back in time is probably not an adequate disclosure. It's not a disclosure at all to me. And then, if you recall, he was made eventually the CEO, and then receiver came in and he was out. And Reichman had retired, so it was kind of confusing. I don't know what he did other than, I think, trying to save the officers and directors by canceling those shares that were obviously shouldn't have been issued at all. We've gone through it. We've gone through the charities. And why was Rahbari interested in GTII anyway? So he's apparently has his own company. He's a well-respected guy. He comes to GTII. Why would he come to GTII? If he did 5 minutes of due diligence, you would know they did nothing, made no revenue. And then if you studied the books, you'd see that there are a lot of questionable transactions. And even after he was there, I think as of May of 2024, they're still selling shares. Management is still selling shares, because I called them out on it. but they're still selling shares and nobody intervenes to stop that. And if you're around those clowns being the prior management, Reichman, etc., how could you permit them to sell shares, especially after you had the issue about the 36 million shares? Seems odd, especially somebody who was kind of brought in to kind of clean up. Now, he cleaned up with the cancellation of those shares. That's I would agree, but those shares obviously shouldn't have been canceled anyway. But my question is all along is why was he there in the first place? Why would he have interest in this company? And again, my only speculation is he was chasing some huge amount of compensation. That's my only speculation, because otherwise, why would somebody who is accomplished, skilled, and with a positive reputation hang out there? It doesn't make any sense to me. So I expect the deposition of Mr. Rahbari to be very interesting as to what occurred during that year and what he did and why he did it and who suggested it. And anybody who wants to email me any questions at tesla420@gmail.com to suggest questions, I'm happy to look at them and pass them on if I think they're appropriate. They have to be kind of narrow and to the point, and you're not like I've kind of thrown out some issues that might be interesting issues to discuss, but I'm happy to consider that. So that is kind of what the Rahbari deposition, and I'm going to attend and I'll talk about it, and it'll be interesting what he says. It'll be interesting what he says as to Markowitz and Oliphant, the two attorneys, other attorneys who are involved, who got shares and are involved in litigation and whose paperwork we've talked about. It'd be interesting to see what they do. Now, last but not least, I just want to kind of throw you out. I've talked about some of the emails I sent in 2024 to management, which I just kind of find it kind of funny, some of them. But one was particularly, I think, I found this hilarious, and it kind of, in my mind, showed the incompetence of prior management, just the response. And it wasn't my most aggressive email, but for some reason, it got the attention of management, and they sent their response to me when they shouldn't have sent it to me. So this is April 1 of 2024, and I'm sending it to Reichman, Jack Fattel, who was the attorney who contacted me, who said they were making progress towards completion of, basically, they were making progress towards completion of a transaction, that the SEC filings would be done, etc., which turned out not to be 100% correct, to be honest, and Kathy Griffin. And my email to them, this is April 1st, 2024. So this is about almost 18 months ago. This will not end well for any of you. Have a good day. It will not be a good week. And she responds. So I don't think she was intending to send this to me, because she sends it to the other people. I think she sends it to Reichman. But this is what she says. And I let her know that she shouldn't be, and I'll tell you what the next one is after this. But her response about me, and did this result in the lawsuit that was filed against me that was dismissed? Perhaps. And I don't know what Rahbari's involvement, if any, was in this, but I thought that this was funny. So I said that, so I'll repeat it again. This will not end well for any of you. Have a good day. It will not be a good week. R. Me. Response. His language is threatening. Isn't that kind of offense? I mean, in every email. Plus, he said you are mentally incompetent and or unstable more than once. Isn't that slander or something? Can he just say things like this? And my response to that is, you shouldn't be copying me on a confidential discussion. That is a waiver of the attorney-client privilege and not very smart. You shouldn't disclose your plan to me. Be well. That's my response to her sending me that email. I was a shareholder at that point in time. No more, no less. But it's kind of funny that they sent that to me. And obviously, my whatever I suggested about Reichman, which was very, I was very careful with my language, honestly. I didn't know the extent of what the receiver found, but I felt it internally. So I kept on digging at them and requesting that they be responsive and come clean. And whatever I suggested in terms of, mentally incompetent or unstable, I know he had, because it came up in the last deposition, I know he had a abscess on his brain. And I know that's one of the issues that can arise for that. And I don't even think I knew he had an abscess on the brain when I said this. But clearly that could support, besides everything else, that could support that kind of conduct. And, as we've discovered from what the receiver said, whatever misconduct I might have suggested or speculated upon ended up being way beyond whatever I could have known and whatever I could have suggested. So I just find it funny again that Griffin, who was a officer and director, literally told me her strategy. And again, just as an example of how incompetent these people were. Just another example. April 15th, 2024. I'm communicating here again with Fattel. Oh, we got a whole crew here. Fattel, Markowitz, Griffin, and Reichman. April 15th, 2024. Again, almost 18 months ago. Investors are, and this is my email to them, and they didn't respond. Investors are asking what the following was used for and what services or value was returned. How did GTII pay promoters and consultants $80,749,448 in shares and $61,958,821 in shares to related parties, friends, and family in 2023? And almost all of what the receivers talked about is this stuff, those shares that now have mysteriously been identified. And we know like some amount of numbers. So we knew vague dollars, but we didn't know shares. We didn't know who it went to, etc. And then I continue with zero revenue. How does this make any sense? Are you willing to repay the shareholders for wasting their equity? Have a great day. And I got no response to that. That's April 15th of 2024. I think Mr. Rahbari was at GTII at that point in time. And I presume, even though it wasn't directed at him, that he would have access to these type of emails. And then last but not least, on April 17th, and the reason why I sent this one was because they were continuing with their stock selling program. And there was a case that came out on, I think it's On Track Inc. And there are these stock sale programs where officers and directors can sell stock subject to a plan. And so, for example, every month they'll sell X number of shares on a certain date, and it'll happen automatically. And the reason why they do that is then they can't be accused of insider trading. It just automatically happens, and that's how it goes on. But there was a case involving On Track Inc. and a principal involving Taryn Pizer. I believe that's the name of the person. At least that's my, if I'm incorrect, then I apologize, but that's what it appears. And it basically found the person responsible or guilty for insider trading, despite the fact there was a 10b5 stock plan. And so I'm telling them here, I know you're selling stock every month per a 10b5 program, but if there's shenanigans going on, that doesn't protect you from insider trading allegations or SEC allegations. Sent that to him on April 17, 2024. Got no response about that. And then I sent another, but anyway, just an example. So I just give you a few examples here. So there's a lot of these emails where I send it to them and I would just call them out on what was the problem or what could be a problem 18 months ago. And here we are. And now we're deposing these people. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that. And it'll be interesting also when we get a stupid audit done. When can we get an audit done? I'm going to continue to raise that until we do. One other issue that I thought was interesting, and I sent this April 19th, 2024, and it'll be the last thing I kind of reference today, is I sent it to Reichman, Fattel, Kathy Griffin, Warren Markowitz, and Luke Rahbari. And it's April 19th of 2024. And somebody, I don't know if somebody mentioned it to me. That's why I probably raised it. Someone raised it as an issue today. The issuance of the special dividend, which many brokers are still not honoring, and that's as of today, was issued at the same time that the concealed downlisting in April 2023 for apparent irregular market trading activities. Some have claimed it was a fraudulent ruse to deflect further scrutiny. So in other words, and people raised it to me, but they were wondering, was the special dividend issued to kind of hide the fact that the company had got delisted and the reason for its delisting? I think it's an interesting question. No response has been provided. I have an opinion on that, but anyway, we'll go that. So let me summarize. So I think I feel comfortable with Forster, just my opinion. I don't know because I'm not firsthand involved with negotiations. I haven't seen the legal documents, etc. But based upon my communication with him, based upon what he communicates, based upon what he has to gain, I side much more with him than I would with the receiver. I question ultimately the receiver's intentions, not his actions to date, because I understand what he's doing and I've been in contact with his counsel, so I support that. But I do not believe that the receiver has any particular interest in shareholders, and I think he will do whatever he can to benefit himself personally without regard to the shareholders. And I therefore would be very concerned to the extent he didn't do a deal with AIVRSITY, but instead did a deal with someone he had a prior relationship with or someone who had a prior dealings with GTII, because I haven't seen anything good coming out of GTII at this point in time. And last but not least, we talked about Rahbari, the deposition that's coming out, and what the GTI officers and directors told me in response about, and were very upset about me accusing them of misconduct in the gentlest form long before the receiver, basically put a splot on them for their misconduct. The deposition of Rahbari will be this week. I will attend and keep you apprised. I expect that we'll hear more in the near future from Forster and probably the receiver as to any particular transaction. I'm hoping that the receiver and Forster can work out some transaction in an amicable way. But my expectation is based upon Forster being into this in legal fees, that if there isn't a deal between AIVRSITY and GTII, that there will probably be some legal proceedings that might arise related to that. I don't know that for a fact, but I can only imagine if someone spends a bunch of money and then a transaction is not completed, that would be the result. And again, the fact that the audit was referenced in September of 2024 as being, and SEC filings too, as being done in the near term, and the fact that we're over a year past that, that gives me also a feeling of confidence that Forster has hung out, because he has nothing to gain by, other than getting a shell that has cost him more than he could buy a shell for. The only thing he has to gain is us shareholders. And so I think that is what gives me comfort, that he wouldn't be here unless he intended to benefit shareholders, because he has nothing to gain otherwise. And I don't believe the receiver is in the same place, because the receiver is looking to get compensated. And that fifth receiver report where he's spent time specifically justifying his compensation. That made me less comfortable about the intentions of the receiver, not more comfortable. The receiver seems to abandon his X account, does not communicate. And again, that's different in this council, but the receiver is kind of out of it. And I expect that any material decision will come before the court. I will certainly be there and kind of comment, and we'll go from there. So that's all I got to talk about today. I blabbered long enough. I thank you all for hanging out, and be well. Take care. Have a great day. And I'm going to post this as on YouTube again. For some reason, my YouTube comes up. I get a double shot, and then it doesn't work. I haven't quite figured out why it's doing that. So I'm going to post this on YouTube also. But anyway, if you have questions that you'd like to ask Rahbari, please send them to me. Tesla420 at gmail.com. Make them short and sweet. And again, it's got to be appropriate for a deposition. And I will certainly review them all, and I will pass on the ones that I think might be appropriate, and I will report about the deposition afterwards. Anyway, thanks again for hanging out. Be well. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the holidays, and see you soon. Ciao.